Lesson 24. What is probability? Probability is the mathematical measure of chance. In situations where randomness determines the eventual outcome of a particular process, one cannot be absolutely certain about the result beforehand. Instead, calculating probabilities provides us with a means to evaluate the likelihood of particular possible outcomes. There are various approaches to calculating probabilities in statistics. In this lesson, the relative frequency or proportion approach to calculating probabilities will be utilized. Therefore, the probability that an event will occur is measured by the proportion, that is, the fraction, decimal, or percentage of the time that event can occur. The probability that a particular event E occurs is denoted by the following formula, where P sub E represents the probability that the event E occurs. We use the lowercase p to denote probability and subscripts to clarify the particular probability we're trying to calculate. So the probability that an event E occurs is equal to the proportion of the time that event occurs. That is, it's a relative frequency. Therefore, we have to count f of E, the frequency, or the number of ways the event E can occur. And then we divide it by capital N, which represents the total number of possible outcomes. Taking the number of ways the event can occur and dividing by the total number of possible outcomes gives us our measure of probability that that event will occur. This relative frequency or proportion approach to calculating probabilities applies to situations where each of the fundamental units used to count the total number of possible outcomes are equally likely. If they're not equally likely, this approach to calculating probabilities doesn't work. For instance, when a fair coin is tossed, the probability the coin comes up heads is the proportion of the time it comes up heads out of the total number of possible outcomes. So this can be found by counting how many ways a coin can come up heads and dividing by the total number of outcomes when a fair coin is tossed. Well, when a fair coin is tossed, there are two possible outcomes. It can either come up a heads or a tails. And of these two possible outcomes, the way in which it comes up a heads is just one way. So the probability that a fair coin, when tossed, comes up heads is one chance out of two. And this probability approach works because a fair coin, when tossed, has equally likely outcomes, heads or tails. So the probability that the coin comes up heads is one chance out of two, or 1/2, as the fraction form answer. If 1/2 is then divided and converted into decimal, we get 0.5, or 0.500 when we want to carry out the three places after the decimal, as we do with relative frequency or proportion calculations. Multiplying the decimal result by 100% converts it to the percentage form of the probability, or 50.0%. That is, carrying the extra decimal place in percentages to help minimize the round-off error. For instance, when a standard 6-sided die is rolled, the probability the die comes up 4 is calculated by looking at the proportion of the time it could come up 4. This is done by counting out of the total number of possible outcomes how many times it can roll a 4. Well, when a standard 6-sided die is rolled, there are 6 possible outcomes that can occur. It could either come up a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. 4 is just one of these possible outcomes. And since any one of these 6 possible outcomes are equally likely when a die is randomly rolled, the probability that it comes up a 4 is just one chance out of the total of 6, which in fraction form is 1/6, or if divided, in decimal form it's 0.167 rounded off to the nearest thousandth, or if multiplied by 100%, we get 16.7%. So there's a 16.7% that a standard 6-sided die, when rolled, will come up a 4. In order to correctly calculate the probability of an event occurring, it is absolutely essential that the random process under investigation be clearly understood. Without that knowledge, counting the total number of possible outcomes and the number of ways that event can occur amongst all those possible outcomes would not be feasible. The following examples are designed to demonstrate this relative frequency or proportion approach to calculating probabilities.